The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, the familiar sound triggering a flood of memories I thought I'd left behind 4 years ago. The two-story colonial looked smaller somehow, weathered by time and seasons I hadn't witnessed. Mom's rose bushes had grown wild along the front porch, their thorny branches reaching toward windows like desperate fingers. I sat in my car for a moment longer than necessary, watching the golden afternoon light paint shadows across the lawn where my brother Jake and I used to throw a football until our arms ached. The same lawn where his best friend Tyler would show up unannounced, his bike abandoned carelessly on the grass, never bothering to use the kickstand. Tyler, 4 years since I'd seen him, 4 years since I'd graduated high school and fled to college 3 states away, desperate to escape the suffocating familiarity of this small town and all the complicated feelings that came with it. I'd built a new life there, new friends, new experiences, new versions of myself that didn't have to navigate the minefield of growing up gay in a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. But now, I was back, at least for the summer, and the weight of unfinished business settled on my chest like a stone. The front door opened before I could gather the courage to get out of the car, and Jake emerged with that same easy grin that had always made everything look effortless for him. At 25, he'd filled out since high school, his shoulders broader, his jawline more defined. Success suited him. He'd taken over Dad's construction business after college and turned it into something bigger, something that employed half the town. "About time, little brother," he called out, jogging down the porch steps. The nickname stung the way it always had, even though I was only 2 years younger. In every way that mattered growing up, Jake had always seemed decades ahead of me. I climbed out of the car and was immediately engulfed in one of his bone-crushing hugs, the kind that reminded me why I'd been the starting center on our high school basketball team despite being 3 inches shorter than I should have been. Jake had taught me how to use my body as a weapon, how to hold my ground against bigger opponents. "Good to see you, man. Mom's been cooking for 3 days straight. I think she's convinced you've been starving yourself up north." I laughed, but it felt hollow. "You know how she is. Remember when I came back from that week at band camp in 8th grade and she acted like I'd been away at war? At least she didn't cry this time when you pulled up," Jake said, glancing back at the house. "Though give her 5 minutes." We started toward the house, Jake grabbing my duffel bag from the back seat despite my protests. It was such a quintessentially Jake thing to do, take care of everyone around him without being asked, without making a big deal about it. It was probably why his business was so successful, why everyone in town trusted him with their most important projects. "So," I said, falling into step beside him, "how's the company? Mom said you landed that contract for the new shopping center, Sisitama." Jake's chest puffed out slightly, the way it always did when he was proud of something but trying not to show it. "Yeah, it's going to be huge. Biggest project we've ever taken on. Actually, that's part of why I'm glad you're back for the summer." "Oh? I could use an extra hand. I know you're not exactly built for construction work." He shot me a teasing look. "But we need someone good with numbers, organization, that kind of thing. You always were the smart one." The casual compliment warmed something inside my chest, the way Jake's approval always had. Growing up, I'd lived for the moments when my older brother acknowledged that I was good at something, anything, even if it wasn't the same things he excelled at. We were halfway up the porch steps when I heard it, a laugh from inside the house that made my stomach drop and my pulse quicken, deep, rich, unmistakably familiar. A laugh that had soundtracked my teenage years, usually coming from Jake's bedroom down the hall from mine, or from the basement where they'd spent countless hours playing video games and talking about girls I pretended to be interested in. Jake caught my expression and grinned. "Oh, right. I should probably mention Tyler's here. He's actually been staying in the guest room for a few weeks while he looks for his own place. He moved back from Chicago last month, took a job with the county planning department." My mouth went dry. "Tyler's here? Now?" "Yeah, man, it'll be just like old times. The three of us hanging out again." Jake's enthusiasm was genuine, oblivious to the way my carefully constructed composure was crumbling with each step toward the front door. "He was asking about you just yesterday, wondering when you'd be back." He was asking about me. I followed Jake into the house, my legs moving on autopilot while my mind reeled. The living room looked exactly the same. Mom's floral wallpaper, Dad's leather recliner positioned strategically in front of the TV, the family photos marching across the mantelpiece in chronological order. But everything felt different now, charged with an electricity that made my skin prickle. And then I saw him. Tyler was sprawled across the couch the way he always used to be, long legs stretched out, one arm draped casually along the back cushions. But the boy I remembered had been replaced by a man, and the transformation was breathtaking. His dark hair was shorter now, styled instead of the perpetual mess it had been in high school. His face had lost the last traces of boyish softness, his features sharp and defined. He'd always been tall, but now he carried himself differently, confident in a way that came from growing into his own skin. He looked up when we walked in, and our eyes met for the first time in 4 years. "Well, well," he said, unfolding himself from the couch with fluid grace. "Look what the cat dragged in." His voice had changed too, deeper, rougher around the edges. It sent a shiver down my spine that I hoped didn't show on my face. "Hey, Tyler," I managed, grateful that my voice came out steady. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled me into a hug that was somehow both familiar and completely foreign. He smelled different, not like the cheap cologne he'd doused himself in during high school, but something warmer, more sophisticated. Cedar and citrus and something uniquely him that I couldn't name but that made my head spin. The hug lasted a beat too long, his hand lingering on my back even after we'd separated. When I stepped away, I caught something in his expression, a flicker of something I couldn't quite identify before his trademark grin slid back into place. "Look at you, college boy," he said, looking me up and down in a way that made heat crawl up the back of my neck. "All grown up." "So are you," I replied, then immediately regretted it because it sounded breathless and obvious and like exactly the kind of thing someone would say when they were trying very hard not to stare at how good someone looked. Jake, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension crackling between us, clapped Tyler on the shoulder. "I was just telling him about the construction project. Think we can put him to work?" Tyler's grin widened, and there was something almost predatory in it that made my pulse stutter. "Oh, I think we can find something for him to do." The way he said it, loaded with innuendo that probably only I could hear, made my cheeks burn. I looked away quickly, pretending to study the family photos on the mantel, but I could feel his eyes on me still. "Actually," Jake said, glancing at his watch, "I need to run out and check on the crew at the Morrison site. Should be back in a couple hours. Mom left dinner in the slow cooker." He grabbed his keys from the coffee table and headed toward the door, then paused. "Tyler, why don't you show him where we put his stuff? His old room's being used for storage now." And then he was gone, leaving us alone in the sudden quiet of the house. I stood frozen for a moment, hyper-aware of Tyler's presence behind me, of the way the afternoon light streaming through the windows seemed to highlight every detail of the room I'd grown up in. Everything looked the same, but I felt like a stranger in my own home. "Come on," Tyler said finally, his voice softer now without Jake there to perform for. "I'll show you your room." I followed him upstairs, trying not to watch the way his shoulders moved under his t-shirt, trying not to notice how his jeans fit perfectly across his hips. The guest room was at the end of the hall, across from Jake's old room and 2 doors down from mine. It was small but comfortable, with a double bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the backyard. Tyler leaned against the doorframe while I set my duffel bag on the bed, and when I turned around, he was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. "It's weird, isn't it?" he said. "Being back?" "Yeah," I admitted. "Everything's the same, but different," he finished. "I know what you mean." There was something in his tone that made me look at him more closely. Up close, I could see the faint lines around his eyes, the slight stubble along his jaw. He looked tired, maybe even a little sad. "How long are you staying?" he asked. "Just for the summer, then back to finish my master's program." "Right. Jake mentioned you were doing graduate work, psychology, right?" I nodded, surprised he remembered. "Clinical psychology. I want to work with teenagers." "That makes sense," he said, and there was something almost fond in his voice. You always were good at reading people, seeing things other people missed. The compliment caught me off guard, mainly because I'd never thought Tyler paid much attention to me at all back in high school. I'd always been Jake's little brother, a peripheral figure in their friendship, tolerated but not really included. "What about you?" I asked, desperate to change the subject before I did something stupid like blush again. "Jake said you were in Chicago." "Yeah, for about 2 years, architecture program at Northwestern." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that was achingly familiar. "It didn't work out." "I'm sorry," he shrugged. "It wasn't meant to be. Besides, this town has a way of calling you back, doesn't it?" There was something wistful in his voice that made me want to ask more, but before I could, he pushed himself away from the doorframe. "I'll let you get settled," he said. "But dinner's probably ready soon, and your mom will have my head if I let you starve on your first night back." He started to leave, then paused in the doorway. "It's really good to see you again," he said quietly, and this time there was no teasing in his voice, no performance, just sincerity that made my chest tight. I missed this, all of us together. After he left, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process what had just happened. The Tyler I remembered from high school had been loud, confident, the kind of guy who filled every room he entered. He'd been Jake's best friend, his partner in crime, the person my brother trusted more than anyone else in the world. He'd also been completely, utterly straight. At least, that's what I'd always assumed. He'd dated Sarah Patterson for most of junior and senior year, had talked endlessly about which girls he thought were hot, had been the kind of stereotypically masculine teenager that small towns produce by the dozen. But the man who'd just left my room seemed different. More thoughtful, more aware of nuance and subtext. The way he'd looked at me, the way he'd hugged me, the loaded comment about finding something for me to do, it all added up to something that made my head spin with possibility and terror in equal measure. Because Tyler had been off limits then, and he was even more off limits now. He was my brother's best friend, the person Jake trusted most in the world. The line I was never supposed to cross, not even in my own mind. But as I unpacked my clothes and tried to ignore the way my hands were shaking, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at me, like he was seeing me for the first time, like he was trying to figure out some puzzle I didn't even know I was presenting. Dinner was a surprisingly comfortable affair. Mom had indeed cooked enough food to feed a small army, and she fussed over me the entire time, asking about school and friends and whether I was eating enough vegetables. Dad, gruff as always, but obviously pleased to have me home, grilled me about my plans for the summer and whether I'd given any thought to moving back permanently after graduation. Tyler and Jake fell back into their old rhythm easily, finishing each other's sentences and referencing shared memories I wasn't part of. But every now and then, Tyler would catch my eye across the table, and I'd feel that same electric jolt I'd felt in the living room earlier. After dinner, Jake disappeared to take a phone call from a client, leaving Tyler and me to clean up. We worked in comfortable silence, moving around each other in the small kitchen with surprising ease. When our hands brushed reaching for the same dish, neither of us pulled away immediately. "Your mom's still the best cook in town," Tyler said, drawing the last plate. "Some things never change," I agreed. "And some things do." The way he said it made me look up, and I found him watching me again with that same unreadable expression. "You've changed since high school," he said quietly. My pulse quickened. "So have you. I mean, a lot." We stood there for a moment, the kitchen suddenly feeling too small, the air too thick. Tyler opened his mouth like he was going to say something else, but Jake's voice from the living room broke the spell. "Tyler, you want to play some Xbox? I've got that new racing game." "Yeah," Tyler called back, but his eyes never left mine. "I'll be right there." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of video games and casual conversation, but I was hyper-aware of every moment Tyler and I were in the same room. The way he sat just a little too close on the couch, our knees almost touching. The way he'd glance at me during loading screens like he was trying to memorize my face. The way his laugh seemed to catch in his throat when I made a joke. By 11 o'clock, I was exhausted from the effort of pretending everything was normal. I excused myself, claiming fatigue from the drive, and headed upstairs to my room. I was brushing my teeth in the hall bathroom when I heard footsteps behind me. In the mirror, I could see Tyler leaning against the doorframe, watching me with an intensity that made my hands tremble. "Why do you look at me like that?" I asked quietly, not trusting myself to turn around. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, so softly I almost missed it. "Because I can't not." I nearly choked on my toothpaste. By the time I'd recovered and turned around, he was gone. I lay awake for hours that night, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of what was happening. Every rational part of my brain told me I was imagining things, reading too much into innocent interactions because of my own desperate longing. Tyler was straight, he was Jake's best friend, and I was just projecting my own confused feelings onto him. But that whispered confession in the bathroom, there had been nothing innocent about that. The next few days fell into an easy routine. Jake would leave early for work sites around town, and Tyler and I would spend the mornings helping with whatever projects needed doing around the house. Mom had a seemingly endless list of tasks that Dad had been putting off for months, and we threw ourselves into them with an enthusiasm that probably had more to do with having something to focus on than genuine love of manual labor. Tyler was surprisingly handy with tools, his long fingers deft and sure as he repaired the loose railing on the back porch or replaced the weather stripping around the windows. I found myself watching him work more often than I should have, mesmerized by the flex of muscles in his forearms, the way he'd bite his lower lip when concentrating on a particularly tricky task. "Hand me that screwdriver?" he asked one morning, and when I passed it to him, our fingers brushed. He held on a moment longer than necessary, his thumb grazing across my knuckles. "Thanks," he said, his voice rougher than it should have been for such a simple interaction. In the afternoons, when the heat became unbearable, we'd retreat inside to help Mom with indoor projects or just sprawl in front of the TV with glasses of sweet tea, arguing about what to watch with the easy familiarity of people who'd grown up in the same house. But it was the evenings that were dangerous. Jake would come home tired and covered in sawdust, wanting nothing more than a shower and dinner and maybe an hour of mindless television before bed. Tyler and I, on the other hand, seemed to have endless energy for conversation once the sun went down. We'd end up on the front porch most nights, ostensibly to give Jake some quiet time to decompress, but really because those stolen hours felt like the only time we could be ourselves without pretense. It was on the third night that Tyler brought up my college years for the first time. "So," he said, taking a long drink from his Coke, "tell me about Northwestern. What was it like?" We were sitting on the porch swing, the old chains creaking gently as we rocked back and forth. The night air was thick with humidity and the sound of crickets, and the streetlight at the end of the driveway cast everything in a warm, golden glow. "It was different," I said carefully. "Bigger than anything I'd ever experienced. The city, the school, the people. Everything moved so much faster than here." "Did you like it?" I considered the question. "Most of the time. It was exciting, being anonymous for the first time in my life. Nobody knew my family or my history or anything about me. I could just be whoever I wanted to be." Tyler was quiet for a moment, staring out at the street. "That sounds nice," he said finally. "Being able to reinvent yourself." "What about you? What was Chicago like?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Honestly, it was a disaster. I thought I wanted to be an architect, thought I had this grand plan for my life. Turns out I'm better at appreciating beautiful buildings than designing them. I'm sorry it didn't work out." "I'm not," he said, and when I looked at him in surprise, he was watching me with that intense expression again. "If it had worked out, I wouldn't be here right now." The implication in his words made my heart race. I looked away, focusing on the ice cubes melting in my glass, trying to ignore the way my skin felt too tight, too sensitive. "Can I ask you something?" Tyler said after a while. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Were you happy there? In Chicago, I mean?" It was such a loaded question, layered with meanings I wasn't sure I was ready to unpack. But something in his tone, Vulnerable and almost desperate made me want to be honest. Sometimes, I said. I had friends, I did well in school, I dated some, but I never felt like I really belonged anywhere, like I was always performing some version of myself instead of just being. Yeah, Tyler said quietly. I know exactly what you mean. We sat in comfortable silence after that, the swing creaking gently beneath us. Every few minutes, Tyler's knee would brush against mine as we swayed, and every time it happened, I felt like I was being electrocuted. I should probably head in, I said finally when the tension became unbearable. Yeah, Tyler agreed, but he didn't move to get up. Just a few more minutes? Those few more minutes stretched into an hour and then another. We talked about everything and nothing. Childhood memories, college experiences, dreams for the future that we'd never shared with anyone else. It felt like the kind of conversation you have at summer camp or on the last night of vacation, when temporary intimacy makes you brave enough to reveal pieces of yourself you usually keep hidden. By the time we finally went inside, it was past midnight and Jake had long since gone to bed. We climbed the stairs together, our footsteps muffled on the carpeted steps, and paused at the top of the landing where our rooms branched off in different directions. Good night, Tyler said, but he didn't move toward his room. Good night, I replied, and didn't move toward mine either. We stood there for a moment, close enough that I could smell his cologne again, could see the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. In the dim light from the hallway nightlight, his features were all shadows and angles, beautiful and mysterious. He reached out like he was going to touch my face, his hand hovering in the space between us for one electric moment. Then he seemed to catch himself, his hand dropping back to his side. Sleep well, he said, and disappeared into his room before I could respond. I stood alone in the hallway for a long time after his door closed, my heart hammering against my ribs. Whatever was happening between us was accelerating beyond my control, and I wasn't sure I had the strength to stop it anymore. The next morning brought rain, a summer thunderstorm that kept us all trapped inside. Jake worked on paperwork at the kitchen table while Tyler and I played cards in the living room, but the atmosphere felt charged. Like the air before lightning strikes, every accidental touch sent shockwaves through me. When Tyler reached across me to grab a card and his chest brushed against my shoulder, I had to bite back a gasp. When he stretched out on the floor to study his hand and his shirt rode up, exposing a strip of tan skin above his waistband, I had to force myself to look away. You're distracted today, he observed during our third game of gin rummy. The rain, I said weakly. It makes me restless. Tyler's eyes sparkled with something that might have been amusement. Is that what we're calling it? The comment was so loaded, so obviously flirtatious, that I couldn't pretend anymore that I was imagining things. Tyler was flirting with me. Tyler, my brother's straight best friend, was openly, deliberately flirting with me. The knowledge should have terrified me. Instead, it made me reckless. What would you call it? I asked, meeting his gaze directly for the first time all day. His smile was slow and dangerous. I'd call it a lot of things, but most of them aren't appropriate for mixed company. From the kitchen, Jake's voice called out, You guys want lunch? I was thinking of making grilled cheese. Sounds great, Tyler called back, but he never took his eyes off me. We'll be right there, but neither of us moved. We should go, I said, but my voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Yeah, Tyler agreed, his voice just as rough. We should. Still, we sat there, staring at each other across the scattered cards, the tension between us so thick I could taste it. Tyler's hand was resting on the coffee table, his fingers drumming an absent rhythm on the wood. Without thinking, I reached out and covered his hand with mine. His fingers stilled immediately. For a moment, neither of us breathed. Then Jake's voice came again from the kitchen. Tyler, you coming? I jerked my hand back like I'd been burned, and Tyler scrambled to his feet. Coming, he called, his voice only slightly strained. But when he looked down at me, still sitting on the floor surrounded by cards, his expression was pure want. This isn't over, he said quietly, so quietly that only I could hear. Then he was gone, leaving me alone with my racing heart and the echo of his promise. That night, the storm passed, but the electricity in the air remained. Jake fell asleep early on the couch watching a baseball game, and Tyler and I found ourselves back on the porch swing, drawn to each other like magnets. "We need to talk about what's happening here," Tyler said without preamble. My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" He gave me a look that suggested we were both too intelligent to play dumb. "You know what I mean." I stared out at the dark street, focusing on the circle of light cast by the street lamp. A moth was batting itself against the bulb, desperate and doomed. "I don't know what you want me to say," I said finally. "I want you to say what we're both thinking." When I didn't respond, he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Look, I know this is complicated. I know there are about a million reasons why this is a bad idea, but I can't stop thinking about you. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the moment you walked through that door 3 days ago." My heart was beating so hard I was surprised he couldn't hear it. "Tyler, I know you feel it too," he said, and his voice was so certain that I couldn't even try to deny it. "I see the way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. I feel it every time we touch, even accidentally. This thing between us, it's real." He was right, and we both knew it, but acknowledging it out loud felt like crossing a line I could never uncross. "He's my brother," I whispered. "I know. He's your best friend. I know. He trusts you." "I know that too." Tyler's voice was pained. "Do you think I wanted this to happen? Do you think I planned to fall for my best friend's little brother?" "Fall for?" The words hung between us like a confession, raw and honest and terrifying. "Tyler," I started, but he held up a hand. "I'm not asking you for anything," he said. "I'm not asking you to do anything that would hurt Jake or complicate your family. I needed you to know. I needed to say it out loud, just once." The swing creaked gently as we sat in silence, both of us staring out at the empty street. I could feel the warmth of his body next to mine, could smell his cologne mixing with the scent of rain and summer air. Everything in me wanted to reach for them, to close the distance between us and damn the consequences. Instead, I stood up. "I should go to bed," I said, my voice barely steady. Tyler nodded, but he didn't look at me. "Yeah, good night." I made it to the front door before my resolve cracked. "Tyler?" He looked up, hope flickering in his expression. "For what it's worth," I said, "I'm falling too." Then I fled into the house before I could do something stupid, like kiss him right there on my parents' front porch where anyone could see. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed replaying every moment, every look, every word that had passed between us since I'd been home. The smart thing would be to pack my bags and leave, go back to Chicago early and avoid this disaster before it destroyed everything. But I knew I wouldn't. I couldn't. Because for the first time in my life, someone saw me, really saw me, and wanted me anyway. The boy I'd had a hopeless crush on in high school, the man who'd grown into someone even more magnetic and complex, was falling for me too. It was forbidden and dangerous and probably doomed to end in heartbreak. And I wanted it more than I'd ever wanted anything in my life. The next few days were exquisite torture. Tyler and I danced around each other with careful politeness whenever Jake was around, but the moment we were alone, the air between us crackled with unspoken desire. He'd find excuses to brush past me in narrow doorways, his hand lingering on my lower back. I'd catch him staring at me across the dinner table, his gaze so intense it made me forget how to chew. When we worked together on Mom's honey-do list, every shared tool became an opportunity for contact. Fingers brushing, shoulders bumping, the kind of innocent touches that felt anything but innocent. Jake, thank God, remained oblivious. He was so caught up in his construction project and so genuinely happy to have both of us there that he missed every charged look and loaded comment. It was a Wednesday evening, nearly a week after our conversation on the porch, when everything finally came to a head. Jake had gotten called out to an emergency at one of his job sites. A pipe had burst and flooded the basement of a house they were renovating, and Tyler and I found ourselves alone in the house for the first time since I'd been home. We started the evening innocently enough, ordering pizza and settling in to watch a movie. But the awareness between us was a living thing, making every casual interaction feel weighted with significance. Tyler had claimed the long end of the sectional couch, and I'd taken the chair across from him, but halfway through the movie, he patted the cushion next to him. "Come sit over here," he said. "You can't see the screen properly from there." It was a flimsy excuse. The chair had a perfect view of the TV, but I moved anyway, settling next to him with what I hoped was casual ease. The couch was wide enough that we didn't have to touch, but Tyler immediately shifted closer, closing the distance between us until our thighs were pressed together. "Better?" he asked, and his voice was rougher than it should have been. "Yeah," I managed. "Much better." We pretended to watch the movie after that, but I couldn't focus on anything except the heat of his body next to mine, the way his breathing seemed to match my own, the electric tension that seemed to grow stronger with every passing minute. When the credits rolled, neither of us moved to get up. "We should probably clean up," I said, gesturing toward the empty pizza box and scattered napkins. "Probably," Tyler agreed, but he made no move to stand either. We sat there in the flickering light of the TV, so close I could count his eyelashes, so close I could see the rapid pulse beating in his throat. The silence stretched between us, loaded with everything we weren't saying. "This is dangerous," I whispered. "I know," he whispered back. "If Jake comes home." "He won't." He said it could take hours to assess the damage. Tyler's hand was resting on the couch between us, and as I watched, his pinky finger extended slightly, brushing against mine. Such a small touch, barely contact at all, but it sent electricity shooting up my arm. "We shouldn't," I said, even as I let my finger curl around his. "No," he agreed. "We shouldn't." But he was leaning closer now, close enough that I could feel his breath on my face, close enough that I could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure it would burst. "If we do this," Tyler said quietly, "everything changes." "I know. There's no going back." "I know." His free hand came up to cup my face, his thumb tracing along my cheekbone with heartbreaking tenderness. "Are you sure?" he asked. Instead of answering with words, I closed the distance between us. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, like we were both afraid the other might pull away. But when I didn't retreat, when I instead pressed closer and let my lips part under his, Tyler made a sound low in his throat and deepened the kiss. It was everything I'd imagined and nothing like I'd expected. Tyler kissed like he did everything else, with complete focus and devastating skill. His mouth was warm and sure against mine, his tongue tracing the seam of my lips until I opened for him completely. Time seemed to stop. There was nothing in the world except Tyler's hands in my hair, Tyler's mouth moving against mine, Tyler's body pressed close enough that I could feel his heart racing just as fast as my own. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Tyler rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed, his hands still tangled in my hair. "Jesus," he whispered. I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. I could only stare at him and marvel at the fact that this was real, that Tyler Brennan, the boy who'd been completely off limits for so many years, had just kissed me like his life depended on it. "I've wanted to do that since you walked through the door," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Hell, I've wanted to do that since we were teenagers, but I was too scared to admit it, even to myself." The confession hit me like a physical blow. "Since we were teenagers?" Tyler's laugh was shaky. "You really had no idea, did you? How hard it was for me to be around you back then. I spent 4 years convincing myself that what I felt was just, I don't know, confused admiration or something. But seeing you again, seeing the man you've become," he shook his head. "I can't lie to myself anymore." I thought about high school, about all the times I'd caught Tyler looking at me and told myself I was imagining things, about the way he'd always been just a little too friendly, just a little too interested in what I was doing, about the night senior year when he'd shown up drunk at our house after prom and spent an hour in my room talking about how scared he was of the future, how he felt like he was pretending to be someone he wasn't. Had he been trying to tell me something then? Had I missed all the signs because I was so convinced that someone like him could never want someone like me? Tyler, I started, but he pressed a finger to my lips. We don't have to talk about it now, he said. We don't have to figure out what this means or where it's going. I needed you to know. But before I could respond, we heard the sound of a car door slamming in the driveway. Jake was home. We sprang apart like we'd been electrocuted, Tyler practically launching himself to the other end of the couch while I grabbed the remote and frantically tried to look like I'd been absorbed in channel surfing. My lips still tingled from his kiss. My heart still hammered against my ribs, but by the time Jake's key turned in the lock, we were the picture of casual innocence. "Hey," Jake called as he walked in, looking exhausted and covered in mud. That was a nightmare. The whole basement was flooded and we're going to have to replace all the drywall. He paused, taking in our positions on opposite ends of the couch. "What are you guys watching?" "Nothing good," Tyler said, and his voice was only slightly strained. "How bad was the damage?" As Jake launched into a detailed explanation of burst pipes and water damage, I snuck a glance at Tyler. His face was carefully composed, but I could see the rapid pulse in his throat, the way his hands were clenched into fists on his thighs. We'd kissed. Tyler and I had actually kissed, and it had been everything I'd ever dreamed it would be and more. But now Jake was here, tired and trusting and completely oblivious to the fact that his best friend and his brother had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. "I'm going to grab a shower," Jake said finally, running a hand through his muddy hair. "Tyler, you mind if we tackle those estimates tomorrow instead of tonight? I'm beat." "Of course," Tyler said. "Get some rest." Jake disappeared upstairs, and suddenly Tyler and I were alone again. But the spell was broken now, the reality of our situation crashing down around us like cold water. "I should go to bed," I said, standing up quickly. Tyler nodded, but I could see the hurt flicker across his expression. "Yeah, good idea." I made it to the stairs before his voice stopped me. "Hey." I turned back, and he was looking at me with such intensity that I had to grip the banister to keep my knees from giving out. "If I told you a secret," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "would you hate me for it?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with everything we couldn't say. I stood frozen on the bottom step, watching him in the dim light from the hallway, and felt the world shift beneath my feet. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. Instead, I just watched him, taking in the way his shoulders were tense with anticipation, the way his eyes never left mine, the way he seemed to be holding his breath, waiting for my response. The house was quiet around us, Jake's footsteps overhead in the shower the only sound breaking the silence. The world felt smaller somehow, compressed down to just this moment, just the two of us and the weight of years pressing between us. Finally, I took a hesitant step closer. "Tell me," I whispered. Tyler's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet I had to strain to hear him. "I used to think about you," he said, the words falling between us like stones into still water. "Back then, during high school, I'd lie awake at night in Jake's room listening to you move around in yours, and I'd think about what it would be like to knock on your door, to tell you how I really felt." My heart stopped beating entirely. I used to make excuses to come over when I knew Jake wouldn't be home for a while, hoping I'd catch you alone. "Remember that time junior year when you got sick and missed a week of school? I came by every day with the homework Jake collected for you, but really I just wanted to see you, to take care of you." I remembered. I'd been surprised that Tyler kept showing up since Jake could have just brought the assignments home himself. But Tyler had sat with me for hours, making sure I understood the material I'd missed, bringing me soup that his mom had made. I'd thought he was just being kind. "I convinced myself it was just a phase," Tyler continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Teenage confusion or whatever, but when you left for college—" He shook his head. "I missed you every single day, not the way you miss a friend, the way you miss someone you're in love with." The confession hit me like a physical blow. All those years I'd spent convinced I was alone in my feelings. All those nights I'd tortured myself imagining what it would be like if Tyler could see me as more than just Jake's little brother. He'd been feeling the same thing. "Tyler," I breathed, but he held up a hand. "I know it's crazy," he said quickly. "I know it's wrong and complicated and probably the worst possible timing, but when I saw you walk through that door last week, everything I'd tried to bury came flooding back, stronger than ever." I stared at him across the small distance that separated us, my mind reeling. "I still do," he whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. "Think about you, all the time." The words broke something open in my chest. Before I could stop myself, I was crossing the room, drawn to him like gravity. Tyler's eyes widened as I approached, hope and fear warring in his expression. I stopped just inches away from him, close enough to see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, close enough to smell his cologne and the faint scent of sawdust that always clung to his clothes after working with Jake. "I thought about you too," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Every night. I used to listen for your voice through Jake's door, and I'd fall asleep imagining what it would feel like if you were talking to me instead." Tyler's breath caught. "Really?" Instead of answering, I reached up and touched his face, my fingertips tracing along his jaw the way I'd dreamed of doing for years. His skin was warm and slightly rough with stubble, and when I brushed my thumb across his lower lip, he shivered. "This is insane," I whispered. "I know," he whispered back, but he was leaning into my touch, his eyes fluttering closed. "If Jake finds out, he won't. But if he does," Tyler's eyes snapped open and he caught my hand in his, pressing it flat against his cheek. "Then we'll deal with it. But right now, all I care about is this, you and me." The distance between us evaporated. This time, when Tyler leaned down to kiss me, there was no hesitation, no tentative exploration. This kiss was desperate and hungry, months of pent-up longing compressed into the slide of lips and tongues, the press of bodies that had been kept apart for too long. I made a sound against his mouth, half gasp, half moan, and Tyler responded by backing me against the wall, his hands framing my face like I was something precious he was afraid to break. This kiss was different from the first one. Less sweet discovery, more raw need. I could taste the desperation in it, the years of wanting and waiting and convincing ourselves this could never happen. When Tyler's tongue traced the seam of my lips, I opened for him eagerly, and the sound he made in response sent fire racing through my veins. We might have stayed like that forever, lost in each other and the overwhelming relief of finally being able to touch and taste and feel everything we'd been denying ourselves. But the sound of the shower shutting off upstairs broke through the haze of desire like a bucket of ice water. We sprang apart, both of us breathing hard. Tyler's hair was messed from my fingers, his lips swollen and dark, and the sight of him looking so thoroughly kissed because of me made something primal surge in my chest. "Upstairs," he breathed. "Now." I didn't question it. I couldn't have formed a coherent thought if my life depended on it. I just followed him up the stairs on unsteady legs, hyper-aware of every creak of the old wooden steps, every sound that might give us away. At the top of the landing, Tyler caught my hand and pulled me toward his room, the guest room that had become his temporary sanctuary. We slipped inside just as Jake's bedroom door opened down the hall. Tyler pressed me back against his closed door, both of us holding our breath as we listened to Jake's footsteps in the hallway. For a moment, the footsteps paused right outside Tyler's door, and I was certain we'd been caught, certain Jake could somehow hear the way my heart was hammering against my ribs. But then the footsteps continued toward the stairs, and we heard Jake call out, "I'm going to grab some water. You guys need anything?" "We're good," Tyler called back, his voice remarkably steady considering he was pressed against me from chest to thigh, his hands braced on either side of my head against the door. "Okay, I'm heading to bed after this. Early morning tomorrow." We waited until we heard Jake's footsteps on the stairs before either of us dared to breathe properly. "Jesus," Tyler whispered, his forehead dropping to rest against mine. That was close, too close. The reality of what we were doing, of what we were risking, crashed over me all at once. This wasn't just about us anymore. This was about Jake, about family, about friendships that could be destroyed with one careless moment. "Maybe we should," I started, but Tyler silenced me with a finger to my lips. Don't, he said quietly. Don't think. Not tonight. Please. And I didn't want to think. I was so tired of thinking, of analyzing every interaction and second-guessing every impulse. For once in my life, I just wanted to feel. Tyler's room was small and sparse, containing little more than a bed, a dresser, and a single chair by the window, but it felt intimate in the darkness, like our own private world where the rules of the outside didn't apply. Tyler moved away from the door, and for a moment I thought he was going to turn on the lights. Instead, he went to the window and adjusted the curtains, ensuring we were completely hidden from the outside world. When he turned back to me, his expression was soft and uncertain in the dim light filtering in from the street lamp outside. I don't want you to do anything you're not comfortable with, he said. We can just talk, or I can sleep on the floor, or... Tyler. I crossed the room and took his hands in mine, stopping his rambling. I want to be here, with you. The relief that crossed his face was almost heartbreaking. Are you sure? Instead of answering, I kissed him again, softer this time, but no less meaningful. Tyler's hands came up to cup my face, his thumb stroking across my cheekbones with heartbreaking tenderness. We moved to the bed slowly, carefully, like we were both afraid this was all a dream that might shatter if we moved too quickly. Tyler sat on the edge of the mattress and pulled me down beside him, and suddenly we were facing each other in the intimate darkness, close enough to touch, but not quite touching. I can't believe this is real, Tyler whispered, his fingers tracing along my arm so lightly it was almost not contact at all. I know, I whispered back. I keep waiting to wake up. If this is a dream, I never want to wake up. We lay down facing each other, still fully clothed, still maintaining that careful distance. But being this close to Tyler, being able to see every detail of his face in the dim light felt more intimate than anything I'd ever experienced. Tell me about Chicago, Tyler said quietly, what it was really like. So, I did. I told him about the freedom and the loneliness, about the friends I'd made and the relationships that had never quite felt right. I told him about the men I'd dated, how I'd always been looking for something I couldn't name in their faces. I think I was looking for you, I admitted. In all of them, trying to find pieces of what I felt for you in other people. Tyler's hand found mine in the darkness, our fingers interlacing. I did the same thing. That's part of why the architecture program didn't work out. I was so distracted, so focused on what I'd left behind that I couldn't concentrate on anything else. Is that why you came back? Tyler was quiet for so long I thought he'd fallen asleep. But then his thumb brushed across my knuckles, and I knew he was still awake. Partially, he said finally, but mostly I came back because I couldn't stay away anymore. I told myself it was about the job, about wanting to be closer to family. But really I was hoping you'd come home too. I was hoping for exactly this. My throat tightened with emotion. Tyler, I know it's selfish, he said quickly. I know this complicates everything for you, your family, your relationship with Jake. If you want to pretend this never happened, I'll understand. I'll find somewhere else to stay and we can just... No. The word came out more forcefully than I'd intended. No, I don't want to pretend this never happened. I can't. Tyler's relief was palpable. What do we do now? It was the question I'd been dreading, the one I didn't have an answer for. What did we do? How did we navigate this impossible situation without destroying everything we cared about? I don't know, I admitted, but I know I don't want to lose this, whatever this is. Neither do I. We lay there in the darkness, hands clasped between us, both of us afraid to sleep because that would mean this perfect, impossible moment would end. I could hear Tyler's breathing gradually evening out, but every time I started to drift off, the reality of our situation would crash over me again, jolting me back to wakefulness. He wasn't just my brother's best friend anymore. He was something I didn't have a name for, something I couldn't let myself want, but did anyway. Something that felt like coming home and falling off a cliff all at the same time. At some point in the early hours of the morning, exhaustion finally won out over anxiety, and I fell into a fitful sleep. But even in sleep, I was hyper-aware of Tyler's presence beside me, of the careful distance we maintained even in unconsciousness, both of us too afraid of what Jake might think if he found us together. I woke to the sound of Tyler's alarm, set deliberately low so it wouldn't wake anyone else in the house. Gray morning light was filtering through the curtains, and for a moment I was disoriented, unsure where I was or why Tyler's face was the first thing I saw. Then memory crashed back over me, and I was instantly, completely awake. Tyler was watching me with soft eyes, his hair mussed from sleep, and seeing him like this, vulnerable and unguarded in the morning light, made my chest tight with emotion. "Hi," he whispered. "Hi," I whispered back. We lay there for a moment just looking at each other, both of us probably thinking the same thing. In the harsh light of day, this felt both more real and more impossible than it had in the darkness. "I should go back to my room," I said reluctantly, "before Jake wakes up." Tyler nodded, but his hand tightened on mine. "I know. Just one more minute?" I couldn't deny him that. I couldn't deny myself that. So we lay there in the growing light, memorizing each other's faces, storing up this moment against whatever came next. When I finally forced myself to get up, Tyler caught my hand. "Last night wasn't a mistake," he said firmly. "Whatever else happens, I need you to know that." "I know," I said, because I did. Whatever the consequences, whatever complications this created, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. I slipped out of Tyler's room and padded quietly down the hall to my own, hyper-aware of every creak of the floorboards, every sound that might give away where I'd spent the night. But the house remained quiet, and I made it to my room undetected. I crawled into my own bed, which felt foreign and cold after the warmth of lying next to Tyler, and tried to process everything that had happened. The confessions, the kisses, the way it felt to finally hold him and be held by him. It all felt surreal, like something that had happened to someone else, but when I brought my fingers to my lips, I could still taste him there, and I knew it had been real. The next few days passed in a haze of stolen moments and careful performances. During the day, when Jake was around, Tyler and I maintained the same easy friendship we'd always had. We helped with projects around the house, played video games, shared meals with my family, and to anyone watching, we were just two childhood friends catching up after years apart. But underneath the surface, everything had changed. Tyler would brush past me in the kitchen, his hand lingering on my lower back just long enough to make my pulse race. I would catch him watching me across the dinner table, his gaze so intense it made me forget how to breathe. When we sat together on the couch watching TV, we'd find reasons to touch, reaching for the same bowl of popcorn, adjusting the throw pillow we were sharing, casual contact that felt anything but casual. The tension was almost unbearable. It was 3 days after our first night together that we finally found ourselves alone in the house again. Jake had gone to meet with a client about a new project, and my parents had driven to the next town over to visit my aunt. The moment Jake's truck disappeared around the corner, Tyler and I gravitated toward each other like magnets. I was standing in the kitchen making coffee when I felt him behind me, his hands settling on my hips, his chest pressed against my back. "I've been going crazy," he murmured against my ear, his voice rough with want. "Pretending to be normal around you when all I want to do is this." He pressed a kiss to the side of my neck, and I nearly dropped the coffee mug I was holding. "Tyler," I breathed, leaning back against him despite myself. His arms came around me properly then, holding me close, and for a moment we just stood there soaking in the relief of being able to touch again. It had only been 3 days, but it felt like a lifetime. I turned in his arms, and immediately his mouth was on mine, desperate and hungry. This kiss was different from the tentative exploration of our first few encounters. This was pure need, months of pent-up desire finally finding an outlet. "I missed you," Tyler whispered against my lips, and the confession made my heart race. "It's been 3 days," I pointed out, but my voice was breathless. 3 days too long. He was backing me toward the kitchen island, his hands fisting in the front of my shirt, when we heard the sound of a car door slamming outside. We flew apart like we'd been electrocuted. Tyler practically launching himself across the kitchen while I grabbed frantically for the coffee pot, trying to look like I'd been doing something other than making out with my brother's best friend. The front door opened and Jake's voice called out, "Forgot my blueprints. Tyler, you seen them anywhere?" "Check the dining room table," Tyler called back, and I was amazed at how normal he sounded when my own heart was hammering so hard I was sure it would burst. Jake's footsteps crossed the living room, and I focused intently on pouring coffee, trying to will my racing pulse back to normal. In my peripheral vision, I could see Tyler leaning against the counter with studied casualness, but the rapid rise and fall of his chest gave him away. "Found them!" Jake called, and moments later we heard his truck start up again. Tyler and I stood frozen until the sound of the engine faded completely. Then Tyler let out a shaky laugh. "Jesus Christ," he said, running a hand through his hair. "That was too close. Way too close." My hands were shaking as I set down the coffee pot. "Tyler, maybe we should—" "Don't," he said quickly. "Don't say we should stop, please." But if he'd walked in here 2 minutes earlier— But he didn't. Tyler crossed the kitchen and took my hands in his, stilling their trembling. He didn't, and we were careful and everything's fine. This time. Then we'll be more careful. I stared up at him, taking in the determination in his expression, the way his jaw was set with stubborn resolve. "You really think we can pull this off? Keep this secret?" "I have to believe we can," Tyler said fiercely, "because the alternative is losing this, and I can't. I won't lose you again, not now that I finally have you." His words broke down the last of my resistance. Whatever the risks, whatever the potential consequences, I couldn't give this up either. Not when I'd waited so long to have it. "Okay," I said quietly, "but we have to be smarter, more careful." "I know, we will be." That night, after Jake had gone to bed, Tyler and I found ourselves on the front porch again. It had become our place, our refuge, the one space where we could be together without pretense. We sat closer than we should have, Tyler's hand resting on the swing between us where anyone driving by could see it. But the street was empty, the neighborhood quiet, and for a little while we could pretend we were just two people falling in love instead of two people whose love could tear apart everything they cared about. "What do we do when he finds out?" Tyler asked quietly, voicing the fear that had been haunting both of us. I was quiet for a long moment, watching a moth flutter around the porch light. "We don't let him," I said finally. "And if we can't prevent it? Then we deal with the consequences, together." Tyler's hand found mine in the darkness, our fingers interlacing. "I keep thinking about what my life was like before you came back. Empty, you know? I was going through the motions, but I wasn't really living." "I know what you mean. Do you ever regret it, coming back?" I turned to look at him, taking in the sharp angles of his profile in the dim light. "Never. Even if this all falls apart tomorrow, I'll never regret finding out what this feels like." Tyler's smile was soft and sad. "This can't last forever, can it? You hiding out here for the summer, sneaking around, pretending we're just friends. I know. In a couple of months, you'll go back to finish your degree. And then what? A career, a life somewhere else? You're too smart, too talented to waste away in a small town like this." The reminder of my real life waiting for me back in Chicago hit like a physical blow. I'd been so caught up in the intensity of being with Tyler that I'd almost forgotten about the master's program I needed to finish, the thesis I had to write, the internships I'd lined up for next year. "Maybe I don't have to go back," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, they felt hollow. We both knew I couldn't stay. My life was elsewhere, my future carefully planned and waiting for me. "Yes, you do," Tyler said gently, "and I wouldn't ask you not to. Your dreams are too important." "What about your dreams?" Tyler laughed, but there was no humor in it. "My dreams change every time I look at you." We sat in silence after that, both of us contemplating the impossibility of our situation. We were living on borrowed time, stealing moments that belonged to other people, other versions of ourselves. But as Tyler's thumb traced circles on the back of my hand, I couldn't bring myself to care about the future. All that mattered was this moment, this perfect, doomed moment. The next week brought a heat wave that made working outside unbearable by mid-morning. Jake's crew started their days at dawn to beat the worst of the heat, which meant he was leaving the house earlier and coming home more exhausted than usual. It should have given Tyler and me more opportunities to be alone, but instead it made us more cautious. Jake's irregular schedule meant we never knew when he might come home unexpectedly, and the close call in the kitchen had spooked us both. We settled into a routine of careful distance during the day and stolen moments after everyone else had gone to bed. Tyler would wait until he heard Jake's breathing, even out in the room next to his, then slip down the hall to my room where we'd lie together in the darkness, talking in whispers and trading soft kisses that tasted like secret promises. It was during one of these midnight visits that Tyler finally told me about Chicago, about why he'd really come home. "I was seeing someone," he said quietly, his fingers tracing abstract patterns on my arm. "Another guy in the program, Marcus." The name hit me like a punch to the gut, and I had to force myself not to pull away. Of course, Tyler had dated other men. Of course, he'd had relationships. But hearing about it made something ugly and possessive unfurl in my chest. "Was it serious?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I thought it was. We were together for almost a year. He was smart, funny, gorgeous, everything I should have wanted." "What happened?" Tyler was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I couldn't stop comparing him to you. Every time he laughed, I'd think about how your laugh was different, better. When he'd touch me, I'd close my eyes and pretend his hands were yours. It wasn't fair to either of us." The confession stole my breath. "Tyler, I know it was wrong," he said quickly. "I know it was fucked up to be with someone while I was thinking about someone else, but I couldn't help it. You were always there, in the back of my mind, in every quiet moment." "Is that why you broke up?" "Partially, but mostly it was because I realized I'd rather be alone and pining for something I couldn't have than settling for something that wasn't real." I turned to face him fully, trying to see his expression in the darkness. "And now?" "Now I know I wasn't wrong to wait," Tyler said, his hand coming up to cup my face. "This thing between us, it's not just wishful thinking or misplaced nostalgia. It's real, and it's worth every complication it brings." I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes against the surge of emotion his words triggered. I was starting to think I'd never feel this way about anyone. "What way?" "Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Like everything in my life led to this moment." Tyler's thumb brushed across my cheekbone, catching the tear that had escaped despite my efforts to hold it back. "Don't cry," he whispered. "I'm not sad," I said. And it was true. Despite the impossibility of our situation, despite all the reasons this could never work long-term, I wasn't sad. I was overwhelmed and terrified and desperately in love, but not sad. "Good," Tyler said, and then he was kissing me, soft and sweet and full of promise. We made love for the first time that night, slowly and carefully, with the reverence of two people who knew they were stealing something precious from a world that wouldn't let them keep it. Tyler touched me like I was made of something fragile and priceless, and I tried to memorize every sensation, every whispered endearment, every moment of connection. Afterward, we lay tangled together in my narrow bed, Tyler's head on my chest, both of us trying to catch our breath. "I love you," Tyler said against my skin, so quietly I almost missed it. My heart stopped, then started again at double speed. "What?" He lifted his head to look at me, his expression vulnerable and terrified. "I love you," he said again, louder this time. "I've been in love with you for years, and I can't keep pretending I'm not." The words I'd been afraid to even think, let alone say out loud, came tumbling out of me in a rush. "I love you too. God, Tyler, I love you so much it scares me." The relief that crossed his face was heartbreaking. He kissed me again, deeper this time, and I could taste the salt of tears on his lips. "I know this is complicated," he whispered. "I know we don't have any guarantees about the future, but right now, in this moment, I love you and you love me, and that has to be enough." "It is enough," I said, and meant it. We fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other like we were afraid one of us might disappear if we let go. For the first time since I'd been home, I slept deeply and dreamlessly, safe in Tyler's arms. I woke before dawn to Tyler gently shaking my shoulder. "I have to go back to my room," he whispered. "Jake's alarm goes off in an hour." I wanted to protest, wanted to beg him to stay just a little longer, but I knew he was right. We'd been pushing our luck, and eventually our luck would run out. I watched him gather his scattered clothes in the dim pre-dawn light, memorizing the lines of his body, the way his hair stuck up at odd angles, the soft smile he gave me before slipping out of my room. After he left, I lay staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the night before. Tyler loved me. He'd said it out loud, made it real, and I'd said it back, finally giving voice to the feelings I'd been carrying for so long. But as the sun rose and the sounds of the house waking up began to filter through the walls, reality crashed back over me. Love didn't solve the fundamental problem of our situation. If anything, it made it worse, because now we had something real to lose. I was still lying there, lost in thought, when Jake knocked on my door. "You awake?" he called. "Yeah, come in." Jake entered carrying 2 cups of coffee, and the thoughtful gesture made guilt twist in my stomach. He handed me one of the mugs and settled into the chair by my window, looking more relaxed than he had in days. "I've been thinking," he said, "about your job situation this summer. I know construction isn't really your thing, but Tyler mentioned you might be interested in helping with the planning side of the business, permits, scheduling, that kind of thing." Tyler mentioned that? I tried to keep my voice neutral, but something warm unfurled in my chest at the thought of Tyler thinking about ways to help me, to keep me close. "Yeah, last night. He said you've always been good with organization and details, and honestly, I could use the help. The business has grown faster than I expected, and I'm drowning in paperwork." "I'd like that," I said, and I meant it. Working with Jake would give me a legitimate reason to be around Tyler during the day, and it would help keep my mind occupied when the weight of our secret became too much to bear. "Great. We can start Monday if you want. Tyler's going to help too. He's got experience with building permits from his architecture program." The irony wasn't lost on me. Jake was unknowingly creating the perfect cover for Tyler and me to spend more time together, all while trusting us completely. The guilt was going to eat me alive. That evening, Tyler and I found ourselves back on the porch swing, drawn together like we were every night despite the risk. The heat wave had finally broken, and there was a slight breeze that made the oppressive humidity almost bearable. "Jake told me about the job," I said quietly. Tyler nodded. "I hope that's okay. I know it means we'll be around each other more, which could be complicated." Complicated is one word for it. We sat in silence for a while, both of us watching the fireflies blink in the gathering darkness. A few houses down, someone was having a barbecue, and the sound of laughter and conversation drifted over on the evening air. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like?" Tyler asked. "If things were different?" "Different how?" "If we'd met somewhere else, if we weren't this." He gestured between us, encompassing all the complications that made our relationship impossible. "If we were just 2 people who fell in love without all the baggage." I considered the question. "Sometimes, but then I think maybe we needed all the baggage to become the people we are. Maybe we needed to wait, to grow up separately, to figure out who we were before we could figure out who we are together." "You think we would have found each other anyway, in some other life?" The question was so earnest, so hopeful that it made my chest tight. "I have to believe that," I said. "I have to believe that some things are inevitable." Tyler's hand found mine in the darkness. I liked that idea, that we were always meant to find each other. Even if we can't keep each other? The words slipped out before I could stop them, giving voice to the fear that had been haunting me for days. Tyler's hand tightened on mine. "We'll figure it out," he said firmly. "Somehow." But we both knew it wasn't that simple. In a few weeks, summer would end and I'd have to go back to Chicago to finish my degree. Tyler would stay here, building a life in the town we'd grown up in. And Jake would never understand or forgive what we'd done. "This can't last forever," I said quietly, echoing Tyler's words from days earlier. I know, Tyler replied, his voice heavy with resignation. But right now, it's enough. We sat there until long past midnight, talking about everything and nothing, both of us trying to stretch the moment as long as possible. When we finally went inside, we parted ways at the top of the stairs with nothing more than a brief touch of hands, but it felt like goodbye even though we'd see each other again in a few hours. Monday morning brought our first day working together on Jake's business. We met at the construction company's small office downtown, a converted storefront that Jake had been slowly expanding as the business grew. Jake spent the first hour showing me the filing system, explaining the permit process, and outlining the various projects they had going. It was more complex than I'd expected, but also exactly the kind of detailed organizational work that I excelled at. Tyler was there too, ostensibly to help with the planning side of things, but I quickly hassied.